shall concentrate mainly on the parliamentary documentation of those three organs. And I know you're going to ask me, with your virtual question, what is parliamentary documentation? It's a very pompous word, but what I really mean is all documents that are needed for a specific session of an intergovernmental body. And I'm thinking especially of the General Assembly and the Economic and Social Council, because the Security Council has to be ready to meet at any time whenever there is a need. And the Security Council, therefore, does not hold sessions. So there are parliamentary documents, and within the parliamentary documents there are really three categories which are linked to the sequence of events. Let me explain. First of all, when a session is going to start, say the General Assembly in September, during the whole year, practically, that period that precedes the session of the General Assembly, the Secretariat is going to produce documents. And those, I would qualify them as pre-session documents. There could be many kinds of pre-session documents, but all of them are documents that will be needed for a session. I would distinguish, for instance, the organizational papers. The organizational papers would include the provisional agenda, a document on the organization of work, a document on the status of documentation, and reports of procedural committees. All those would be organizational papers. And then we have the reports of the Secretary General and the other principal organs of the United Nations. Now, we shouldn't use the word report so easily, because report in UN parlance has a very specific sense. Report presupposes that there has been a request, that there is a mandate. In other words, the Security Council has to report to the General Assembly at every session. The Secretary General has to submit his annual report to the General Assembly. And also, the General Assembly may ask the Secretary General to report on this or that item. But if the Secretary General were to communicate to the General Assembly to convey his ideas, he cannot do it in the form of a report unless he has been asked to do so, which doesn't mean that he won't do it. Of course he will. But he will do so in a document called Note by the Secretary General. Note could be the initiative of the Secretary General. It could be a very important document. But report, as I said before, is only when there is a mandate to report. Now, not only principal organs will report, but also all the subsidiary organs will report for a given session, especially for a session of the General Assembly, and of course for any session of ECOSOC. There are many important subsidiary organs of the Economic and Social Council. And finally, I would include in the pre-session documentation any communications sent to the General Assembly or to the Secretary General or to the Security Council by member states. They certainly have the right to submit communications and to ask for their distribution. Incidentally, when they ask for distribution of a document of the General Assembly or ECOSOC, they have to indicate the item under which those documents are to be distributed. In the case of the Security Council, it is not the same, because there are no items, there is no session, they are distributed as the need arises. So far, we have been speaking about the pre-session documentation. The General Assembly or the Economic and Social Council is going to hold its session, and what happens during that session? They will examine all the papers I already referred to, but they will also produce their own documentation. Strangely enough, the first part, the pre-session documentation, consists of documents that will remain in existence in the archives. The documents produced during a session will not remain. They are provisional documents. They are actually documents of limited distribution. Why? Because those are drafts. We will deal with draft resolutions, draft decisions, amendments to those draft resolutions or draft decisions. That's why all those documents are considered of a provisional nature and of limited distribution. So the session will be held, and after the session, the body concerned will produce post-session documentation. Everything that has emerged from the session, namely and especially the resolutions and the decisions. Resolutions and decisions, and possibly some reports on the session. Not to the session, but on the session. So now we have our whole spectrum of documents for a given session of the General Assembly or the Economic and Social Council, the pre-session, the in-session, and the post-session documentation.